Hey guys, this is Caleb. Um, we're having some class scheduling issues, so I'm going to actually make this video for you guys showing you how to drop out the backgrounds on the picture we were editing of Kennedy the other day. You can see I've got it on my desktop here. I've already pulled it into Photoshop, just like we were doing, so you can see I'm going to zoom in and you'll see that I've already gotten rid of some of her blemishes and the freckles and things that were on her chest. We've gotten rid of all those. We have lightened up her teeth with the dodge tool, and lightened up her eyes a little bit with that same dodge tool. We have darkened her eyebrows with the burn tool. The same steps we went over in class on Wednesday. Now we're just going to take that a step further and put her on another color background. So it's easy to do this when your subject is on a solid colored background. We have the cyclorama wall down in Studio 96 that we didn't get to shoot on this year, but if you have a chance, I would go down there and use it because it's really awesome. You can get these really high quality, simple white backgrounded shots if you know how to edit them properly. And this is where I shot Kennedy's picture. We had the lighting set up. We shot her on the cyc wall, so we ended up with this really awesome, really solid white background on her image. Now, I sent you guys a tutorial on this from YouTube about how to actually drop out the background, but that was using Photoshop CS6, and so the tools in Creative Cloud are a little differently. You can see I'm running the 2018 version, but anything that's running the Creative Cloud has a different tool. The CS6 version used Refine Edge. This one is going to use what we're calling Select and Mask. Okay, they do the same thing, but they work a little bit differently. The interface is a little bit different. So there's some schools of thought on this. One way to drop out her background is to select her, specifically just her, and then actually make that a selection, and then you can change out the background from there. That's easy to do. Again, usually when you're on a simple background like this, that's pretty easy to accomplish. If they're on a more complicated background, it's probably also easier to select them on their own as well. But also, if they're on a simple background like this, you can also just select the background, which is just all of this white, around her and then in her arm right here. And then select the inverse, which will then select her. I'm going to show you how to do it both ways. So to select objects in your photos or anything you're trying to manipulate in Photoshop, one of the easiest tools you can use to do that is what we're calling the Quick Select tool. Now, this is a new tool. We have not used this yet. This tool, again, allows you to quickly select, hence the name, quickly select parts of your image that you want to manipulate. It'll get marching ants around it, and of course we know that marching ants indicate that that is what's selected, and you can edit that selection. We're going to work with the Quick Select tool for a little while here. It's this brush, it's the fourth option down on my version of Photoshop. And if you hover over in the newer versions, it gives you a larger overview of what those tools do. Again, it makes selections by finding and following the edges in an image. We're going to do this again both ways in this picture. So the Quick Select tool, again, there's other options underneath that, like the Magic Wand tool. We're going to work with just the Quick Select tool, okay? So click on that if you find it in your toolbar. If you have trouble finding that, maybe it's hidden by the Magic Wand. So again, hold down on that menu and make sure that you can find it. But we're going to work with that Quick Select tool. And again, just like these other tools in Photoshop, it gives you a brush, essentially, right? This one has a crosshair in the middle. And it does give you another round brush, okay? Now, the first method I'm going to use is selecting Kennedy herself, just in the image. So we want to put her on another layer. We want to change out the background that's behind her, okay? And we can do that pretty simply. The Quick Select tool, I don't know if you can tell it because of the brush, it has a plus sign on the inside. That means whatever you drag over is going to add to your selection, okay? And we'll adjust those in a second. I'll show you how to do that. But when we hold down our mouse, when we click and drag, okay, it starts making marching ants. All right, you can see that it's selecting what it thinks we want selected. Okay, I'll zoom in some so you can see. We have marching ants going around the edges of her body. Right, so again, here too. And it's going to make the assumption based on similar colors and that kind of thing of what you think, of what it thinks you want selected. So again, it's done this on its own. It's gone around her legs, gone back up her arm over here and around her hair. Now you can see here on her shoulder that it's gotten her hair, but not this little bit of her shoulder right here, okay? So to do that, you can just drag over that part and it will add to that, okay? And it's usually pretty good about making the selection. It's pretty smart about where it goes. Again, so just make sure that it's getting most of her body. And you'll see here on this left side over here that this is not the image where we've gotten rid of that section of hair, so we're just going to work with it the way it is. So we're going to zoom back out into the whole image and make sure that we have her selected, the parts of her that we want selected, okay? And it was smart, again, because it knew to take out this section of white, because that's not necessarily what we want selected, right? All right. So that's one way to select her, okay? And you'll see that when we're using this quick select tool and we have her selected, we get the option up here to use the select and mask tool on this top toolbar up here, okay? So this is in the same position as the refine edge tool in older versions of Photoshop, and it does relatively the same thing, and we'll look at that in a second. But we're going to click on the select and mask tool, because what this does is it refines the edge of your selection. You can see here that there's parts of her hair that aren't necessarily selected. The detailing on her arm maybe isn't as fine as it should be. It works really good with hair, and so that's why we're going to go ahead and click on this. We're going to click on select and mask. We still have her selected. We still have our marching ants around. So now we're going to click on select and mask. All right. And you'll see what happens is that she gets put on a different background. And this is not an actual background. This just shows you what you've actually selected. So it's showing us what we have already selected in the image. In this case, it's Kennedy, okay? Her silhouette in its entirety, okay? It's got this reddish, pinkish background because it shows an overlay. That shows, again, what we've selected and what we haven't. Everything that's red is background. Okay, and you can turn that opacity up too if you want to see it a little bit more, right? Everything that's red is background, okay? Everything that is not background or is not in our selection is full color, okay? And you can change the way this view looks. Depending on the image and depending on what you're trying to actually cut out, these different views may help you. So onion skin is kind of helpful sometimes. Marching ants, again, it'll show you your selection. Overlay is where we work. I generally work in overlay because usually you're not going to have a bright red background on any of your images. So you can usually see some finer details on this red background. You can do it on black. And again, you can turn up these opacities so you can see a little bit better. So on black, you can tell she's got a lot of haze going on, right? Got a lot of some of the white still in her hair. The lines around her arms aren't great. She's got that sort of glow to her that we can tell it was on a white background. We can put her on white, which you can't really tell a whole lot about here because she started out on white, right? You can switch to black and white so you can see the actual selection itself. But I generally work in this overlay format because, again, it allows you to see parts that you need to refine. And what I mean by refine is sort of get rid of sections you don't want and add sections that we do want. And Photoshop's really smart in the way that it does this. This refine edge, or select and mask tool as it's called now, is really smart in knowing kind of what's background and what's similarly colored and what you want selected and what you don't. All right. Some things before we get started. In this window, this pops up a whole new window for your image, okay? It has a lot of options over here, and these may seem intimidating. We're going to go through them and sort of show you what they do. For this edge detection, so we've already gone with the opacity thing. We've changed that, right? So you can see it changes the red, the tone, right? Again, that just helps you based on the background and what you've actually selected in your image to see those details a little bit better. On edge detection down here, what that does is the brush that you're using in a second when we go over and actually brush out these details on this side, what that does is it changes how the brush works a little bit. So generally what I do is click Smart Radius. And what that means is that it's going to be really smart in the way that it selects the pixels that it wants to remove and the ones it wants to keep. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a second. We'll get into these global refinements in a little bit in a second, Mostly the shift edge option is really helpful, and you'll see why in a second. And we'll get to output settings once we're done with the image itself and with the refinements. So now that we're here, we kind of understand a little bit of how this process works. We're going to actually work on getting rid of these excess white areas and actually refining the edge. Again, what we mean by refining the edge is making it finer, making it a little more precise, okay? And what that means specifically for this image that we're using is getting rid of these extra white areas, picking up some of these other hairs over here, okay, so it looks a little bit more natural, okay? And refining some of these areas around her arms and things that are kind of glowy. So these white kind of hazy areas. We're going to work on all that. All right. And to do that, we're going to play with a tool on, oh, bye, Kennedy. Oh, bye. She's coming back. She's coming back. To do that, we're going to work on tools in this left toolbar over here. Okay. We're going to focus specifically on the Refine Edge brush tool, which is what we're using right here. This is how we're actually going to refine our edge. So we're going to use this tool. It's already selected for me. And again, it works just like every other brush in Photoshop. It gives you the round brush. And again, what this tool does is it's smart because we've gotten the smart radius checked over here. It is going to work with our image to sort of figure out what we want to keep and what we don't. And preserve those tones. And so we're going to focus on this area over here for a second. So what we need to happen in this area right here is we need this extra white to go away. Again, it makes the selection more precise. It makes it a little easier to change over to another background because we don't have this extra stuff in our image to disrupt it. Okay. So how this tool works, like any other brush, you just hold down and brush over the parts you want to manipulate. And you'll see what happens as we do this. Okay. So that extra white is going away. Okay, and we'll do this on this whole section. All right, because it's in all of that. Okay. All right, we'll see what happens there. Okay, so you'll see, and it doesn't look very different here, but if we switch it over to on black, okay, you can see that's gotten rid of all the excess white. We need to do it here as well. Okay, gets rid of those excessive white tones in the image. Okay, and it's easy to see that here too. We're going to go around the edge of her hair, okay, and get rid of all that extra white. And it picks up some of the darker tones, some of those little flyaway hairs that I did not get rid of in this version of the image. But you get the point. It picks up those edges and it makes it a little sharper. Okay, it gets rid of that kind of jagged white edge on your photo. And you just keep going, and as you go around, again, it keeps picking up some of the darker areas too, those finer hairs, that kind of thing. So we're going to keep going here. Keep going. Again, it refines the edge. You can do the same thing around her shoulder area. Okay, and it's going to look funny at first, but you'll see how it works in a second. Okay, we'll see what it means in a second. So you want to do this kind of around the entire edge that you've been working with, okay? Just for all intents and purposes. And it's going to look a little funny in the beginning. I'll admit that to you. It's going to look a little funny, especially on skin tones, because skin tones may have a little bit of white in them, and it may want to take some of that out. Okay, but trust me, when you put it on a different background, it's going to make a lot more sense. Okay, and you can see it just, again, refines your edge. It makes it a little more fine. It makes it a little more precise. Okay, it adds to and takes away parts that you want added or taken away. And it smooths out some edges too, so you'll see, remember on those parts around her hair, it was a little jagged, and even these edges on her arm are a little jagged. But you can fix that by just going over it with this Refine Edge brush tool, or the Selected Mask brush tool as it's called now. Again, whatever version you're working in, it all works the same way, okay? So don't let the name of the tool confuse you, because they all do the same thing. All right, so we're going to brush over all this white area here. We're almost done. Almost done. All right. So we're going to call that pretty much done. And you can see, again, it's picked up these finer hairs over here. The edging around her head looks a little better. The edges around her skin tone look a little better. All that looks a little bit better. All right. Now, these global refinements down here, depending on your image, you may need to play with those some too. All right. One thing that I strongly suggest doing every time you manipulate an item or a person out of another background is shift your edge. All right. And again, here, hopefully we'll be able to see it on Kennedy's hair. You can see she still has a little bit of this haze going on because, again, she was on a white background, right? And it's going to naturally add that haze. If you shift your edge in a little bit, so you reduce it maybe to a -5 or 6, okay? You may need to go a little higher. We'll go a little higher so you can see the effect. So you can see what happens as we go in further, right? You can notice it more a little bit more down here with her hair. As we move that back up, right, you get a little bit more added. If you shift your edge in, it takes away some more. All right. Again, that takes away sort of that weird color cast. Okay, and you'll see this when we put her on another background later. So when you're done making your selection, again, refining your selection to the point that you like it and the way you want it, you need to output it. And one of the best way to me that you kind of output it, you want to always select decontaminate colors. And what that means is if there is any kind of weird color cast, which again we had up here, okay, it took that away. I see that's gone now. All right. You always want to decontaminate colors. And then basically it's going to want to output it to a new layer with a layer mask, and that's fine. You have other output options. These are grayed out because we've decontaminated the colors. It limits your options for output, but it helps tremendously in the way the image actually looks when it's outputted. So I'll strongly suggest doing that. Either a new layer or a new layer with layer mask is fine. And you can just go from there. Okay, so we're going to put it out, just output it to a new layer. Okay, just for shits and giggles. And then we're going to hit OK. And it won't look like we've done anything, right? So we're back on our image. Won't really look like we've done anything. Okay, but if we turn off this background layer, we can see that she's by herself. Okay, on this image, on that layer by herself. So now if we grab our move tool, we can move her around. Right, we can put her wherever we want. And that's great for when we need to put another image behind her or whatever else we need to do. Now, for just demonstration's sake, I'm going to put just another plain color behind her. Again, when you're doing this, you can put any kind of image behind her. This all works in layers, right? So you can add another image behind her in a layer. You can add just a solid color background. You could add a backdrop like what you would have for a portrait, anything really. You could drop her on Mars if you had a picture of Mars, right? You can do anything you want at this point. But just for comparison's sake, I'm going to put just a plain colored background behind her. And a really easy way to do that is just taking your rectangle tool, which is down here. And clearly it draws rectangles, right? So that's good. We're going to click on that tool. And we're just going to draw over the frame of the image. Now it can go over it. It's not going to show up. It's not going to matter. Okay. All right. Now whatever color is default picked is going to show up behind there. You can change that color. Okay. But I want you to show you it pops up as a new layer on top of the layer we're actually working on. All right. Now to put her on top of this, all you have to do is click on the layer that she's on and drag it on top. Okay, so now she's on a gray background. All right, let's say we want to put her on a background that is UWA yellow, or UWA red. UWA doesn't have yellow, but UWA red. I know the Pantone color for that, so I'm just going to type that in really fast. Don't worry about what I'm doing, you'll see the effect. Okay, it would help if I was on the right layer. to change the rectangle's fill color, you need to be on that color, on that layer, right? So now she's on a background of UWA red. All right, and again, you can make it blue, pink, again, whatever color your heart desires. She can go on it. Okay, and again, it doesn't have to be a solid color. You can put her on another image. You can drop her onto the football field. You can put anything behind her that you wish. Another image, a solid color, anything like that. But to get her to this point, to get from, here, right, to there, it took some steps, all right? We had to select her using our quick select tool, which again is right here, all right? We had to select her. We had to click on our select and mask option at the top, okay? We had to then refine her edge using that select and mask tool. Had to output her to a new layer, and then make sure she was on the top. We could add another solid color layer with the rectangle that's just behind her. If we had another image, we could drag that in and just make sure she's on top, right? There's a lot of different ways that you can manipulate these photos, okay? And just for comparison's sake, another way to select her is to use your quick select tool and just select all the background, okay, which is solid white, which is pretty easy. It knows to select that really easily. You can see the marching ants are going all around that. You also want that inside part. What that's done is selected all the white part, but we want to make sure that we have her selected and not the background. So if you want to make sure that just she is selected, you can right click once you make your white selection, your background selection, and hit select inverse. You see your marching ants move from here around the edge to just on her. Okay, now she's selected, just her, and you can use the select and mask option and do the same process that we did a while ago. Okay, so you guys have learned how to use the spot healing brush tool. You've learned to use the clone stamp tool. You've learned to dodge and burn features. You've learned to drop out backgrounds and put them on a different background. And you've also learned earlier in the semester how to make pictures black and white. These are the things that are going to be on your quiz, all right? We're still going to work on getting the quiz finalized and when we're actually going to get that completed. But for now, I wanted you guys to have this video so you could walk through this process and play with this on your own. This works on any image, in any background, any subject matter, whatever you want. You can drop out anything and put it on another background, which is really useful as you get in the photography world. All right, we'll talk more in class next week about what we have due. But until then, have a great week.